When President Trump publicly called Denzel Washington's intelligence into question on a live broadcast, what transpired wasn't just an argument. It was a defining moment. Denzel's response didn't quiet the room alone. It electrified the nation. Its impact is still echoing in classrooms today, especially. The event had been framed as just another meticulously choreographed stop on the administration's Voices of America tour. Sold as a stage for public discourse, it functioned more as a photo op intended to reflect unity and gather political capital in crucial swing states. This particular stop brought the tour to Dayton, Ohio, inside a high school gym recently converted into a political stage. The scent of fresh paint lingered beneath decades of lost sporting dreams. The space was carefully staged. Banners hung from every rafter. Rows of perfectly aligned folding chairs sat opposite a stage gleaming with a polished presidential seal. Filled with local dignitaries, national media, and lawmakers, the room was set for a live town hall, broadcast from sea to shining sea. Though built as an open forum, the atmosphere backstage told a different story. Controlled, rehearsed, and finely tuned. Producers whispered instructions through earpieces, while aides passed out cue cards bearing vetted questions. The press pool shifted uncomfortably, sensing the script. The invited guests included Denzel Washington. His presence drew attention, not because he sought it, but because it was impossible to ignore. He wore a sharply tailored suit and crisp white shirt, no tie, just confidence. Calm and composed, his gaze cut through the room like that of a veteran fighter who no longer needed to swing to prove his power. Denzel had been in tight spaces before. This one felt different, not because the cameras were live or the president stood within arm's reach, but because the weight of so many voices that nobody had heard rested on his shoulders. He hadn't come for the applause or headlines. He was there for the people locked out of that gleaming gym. His phone back home overflowed with their stories. Single mothers in crumbling apartments, children in forgotten schools where new books were a distant memory, working-class families spread thin by inflation. He carried all of that into the room. Just feet away stood President Donald J. Trump, rifling through cue cards surrounded by aides. He looked confident, maybe too much so, flashing a grin as an advisor whispered something in his ear. Behind him, glossy banners shouted promises of stronger communities and safer streets. The contradiction clung to the air like summer heat. As moderators walked on stage and kicked off the event, the room responded with polite applause. No more, no less. The president launched into a familiar speech celebrating economic success and American resurgence. Tonight, he said, we listened to the real voices of the country. The first questions went exactly as planned, soft and differential. A sheriff, a small business owner, and a Republican state senator each offered praise that sounded more rehearsed than sincere. Meanwhile, Denzel remained still, arms crossed, eyes unblinking. A pen in his hand moved silently across a blank notepad. Then his name was called. The room shifted. Some smirked. Others leaned forward. Sensing the moment was about to turn, he rose slowly, deliberately, commanding attention without a single word, adjusting the microphone with one hand while the other slipped into his pocket. He faced the president with calm resolve. He introduced himself not as a celebrity but as a messenger. He didn't need to be there. He said, but he had come because the people back home demanded it. The booming economy, the president touted. In Denzel's world, it looked like grocery bills doubling and paychecks frozen in time. Schools were falling apart while billion-dollar stadiums rose overnight. The room went silent. No more notes, no more chords, just a man who had lived the truth and was now laying it bare. His tone remained steady, his cadence unshaken. Every word landed with precision. Then came the question, why had the administration Title I funding for low-income schools? Schools where students still used outdated textbooks, where science labs lacked functioning air conditioning, and where black mold crept up the walls. The atmosphere shifted. People straightened in their seats. Denzel wasn't grandstanding. He was speaking from experience, from listening, from years of watching systems fail those who needed them most. And he wasn't done. Even seasoned political watchers weren't prepared for what followed. Denzel didn't flinch, hands folded calmly, shoulders set. He stood like a man calling out a neighbor at a family cookout. Only this neighbor was the leader of the free world. Trump gave a curt nod, perhaps taken aback, assessing Denzel, as if facing a challenger he hadn't expected. For a brief moment, he said nothing, and that silence spoke volumes. Then came the moderator's voice, slightly cracked with tension. Mr. Washington, could you clarify what you mean by systemic? Denzel didn't blink. Gladly, Denzel replied, his voice calm and cool, the kind of cool that settled over a winter morning. His jaw tensed, just enough to signal the weight of what was coming. He began painting the picture. He spoke of classrooms where rainwater leaked through ceilings, and the only response from officials was a shrug and a claim of no budget. Students packed into overcrowded rooms, passing around tattered textbooks. Many too worn to read. Teachers stretched thin, working long hours or picking up second jobs, still digging into their own pockets just to provide basic supplies. And all the while, the very administration that claimed to champion American youth continued stripping education budgets as if they were loose change. The cameras didn't pan to the president. Instead, they stayed locked on Denzel. He posed a question, his tone low, his words razor sharp. Tell me how that's not systemic neglect. A murmur rippled through the audience, a quiet current of energy. Across the stage, President Trump shifted in his seat, leaned toward the mic, and gave a tight, practiced smile. Let's get something straight, he said with a chuckle that was not warm. Schools were broken long before I got here. That's local government. You need to talk to your mayors. Denzel tilted his head slightly. A trace of a knowing smile flickered across his face. His response was ice cold. Oh, I have, he said. And they've been pleading with your Department of Education for infrastructure grants, the very ones your administration froze last fall. Trump inhaled sharply, ready to interrupt, but Denzel pressed on. You want to make America great again? He asked, voice steady as a drum beat. Start with the children studying in buildings older than the teachers. Start with the kids suspended at twice the rate because no one is trained to recognize trauma, only to punish it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word hit its mark. Greatness doesn't come from slogans, Mr. President. It comes from investing where it matters most. The energy in the room shifted again. The earlier ripple turned into a rumble. Applause broke out. Soft at first, then building. A few people nodded in agreement. Others rose to their feet. Trump's grin was gone. He leaned forward, lifting his chin, and began to tilt his head, the setup he used before he threw a jab. So tell me, Trump said slowly, stretching out the pause, where'd you learn English? And with that, the gym fell silent. Frozen. The moderator didn't move. A producer's voice crackled quietly off camera. The weight of the moment settled heavy on everyone in that space. Denzel didn't flinch. Slowly, purposefully, he leaned into the mic. In public schools, he said, in Los Angeles, Mr. President, each word cut like tempered steel, the same ones your policies have been starving for decades. The silence that followed cracked, first with scattered claps, then louder, a wave of applause rising and rolling through the gym. It hit the bleachers, the rafters, the very walls. Some audience members stood, others sat in stunned silence, mouths slightly open. Trump blinked rapidly, caught off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, but the moderator quickly interjected. Let's move on. Next question. But it was already too late. The moment had taken flight. Phones lit up across the crowd like fireworks. Video clips uploaded in real time. Texts flew. Hashtags exploded before the broadcast even reached its halfway mark. In the fifth row, a teenager whispered in disbelief. At the press table, a Fox News journalist quietly closed her notebook. Meanwhile, Denzel sat back down, calm, steady, unchanged, as if the storm had never touched him. But something had changed. Everyone felt it. That exchange, the line, the silence, the eruption would travel the country in seconds. 17 of them to be exact. That's all it took. 17 seconds from Trump's jab to Denzel's quiet, devastating knockout. Broadcast live, clipped within minutes, and shared millions of times before the gymnasium even emptied. And inside those walls, the applause still echoed off the stage, the floor, the very air. Trump leaned back in his seat, lips tight, fingers drumming on the table. The man who normally commanded every room now found himself cornered. Behind the stage, aides scrambled, voices low but urgent, fingers tapping out texts, directing orders with clip precision. One senior advisor, face tight with frustration, stormed past the curtain, caught the communications director's eye, and gave a slow, unmistakable shake of the head. They didn't need to speak. Both understood what had just happened. On stage, the moderator struggled to move the program forward. "Let's go to Representative Scanlon next," they announced, attempting to reset the tone, but Denzel's words still hung in the air, etched into the space like smoke that refused to clear. In public schools in Los Angeles, Mr. President, in the third row, a teacher from Youngstown dabbed at her eyes. 2 seats over, a steel worker leaned toward his neighbor and asked quietly, "Did he really just say that?" On live TV, he had every word. Meanwhile, Denzel sat back in his chair, fingers interlaced, expression calm, as if the room hadn't just been cracked wide open. The town hall continued, at least on the surface. Behind the curtain, chaos bloomed. In the makeshift control room, a producer barked into a headset, "Get ready, cut to B-roll." Another voice responded, almost resigned, "Too late. It's viral. Trending's already climbing. We can't stop it." On stage, the topic shifted to opioids, to healthcare. President Trump answered the next questions, but the energy was gone. His tone flattened, eyes less certain. The authority he usually carried had slipped away. In his pocket, Denzel's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in from staffers, family, old friends back home. But he ignored it. Not yet. 2 rows behind, a young woman named Kira held up her phone, hands trembling. She hadn't expected a moment like this. Leaning toward her mother, she whispered, "He handled that like my granddad used to, with people who thought they were smarter than him." Calm. Real calm. Her mother nodded, silent pride blooming across her face. But away from the stage, beyond the applause and sidelong glances, the administration's media team raced to contain the fallout. They pushed statements to friendly networks. Phrases like "taken out of context," "misunderstood," and a playful remark flooded the airwaves. Conservative talk shows jumped on it immediately, parroting the spin. But the clip, raw, sharp, undeniable, told another story. It wasn't light. It wasn't a joke. It was calculated disrespect. And by the time they launched the damage control machine, the public had already made up its mind. Within the hour, major outlets jumped in. CNN's banner read, "Washington shuts down Trump after loaded English comment." MSNBC followed with, "Denzel Washington stuns town hall with cool, devastating response." Even TikTok exploded. Users paired the clip with footage of young black boys in classrooms answering tough questions with grace and focus. One caption hit especially hard. "This is where we learned English. Back in that gym, Trump tried to recover." "Look, I wasn't being insulting," he offered during the next question. Voice tight, smile thinner than before. He's a very well-spoken guy. "It was just a light comment, a little joke." Then he added, "Some people can't take a joke anymore." That made things worse. The room's energy shifted. Smiles dimmed. People exchanged glances uneasy. The moderator, sensing the misstep, hurried to steer the conversation away. Denzel said nothing. He didn't have to. Whatever had broken, momentum, image, authority, it couldn't be patched with a grin or a one-liner. The moment had passed, and the audience had already chosen what to believe. Outside those walls, the real storm had just begun. By the time Denzel stepped off the stage, the clip had surged past 2 million views and climbing fast. He didn't need to check. He could feel the shift in the air, in the way people looked at him. Something irreversible had taken place. Backstage, a wide-eyed staffer approached, tablet in hand. "It's everywhere," he said, voice cracking. "Twitter, TikTok, cable. You're on fire." Denzel didn't break stride. He motioned for the young man to follow. "They're going to come hard, right?" he asked calmly. "They already are," the staffer replied. Denzel gave a small, steady smile. "Good." As Denzel made his way toward the green room, he passed one of the president's top aides. Suit impeccable, jaw locked, phone pressed to his ear, The aide glanced up for just a moment, eyes meeting Denzel's. It wasn't fear of the man himself. It was fear of what he represented, unshaken, unbothered. A figure who had just absorbed a cheap shot and transformed it into a moment that reverberated across the nation. A symbol of quiet strength, the kind that couldn't be baited, couldn't be broken. Inside the green room, beneath the hum of flickering fluorescent lights and beside a sagging faux leather couch, Denzel finally took a seat. For the first time since it all unfolded, he pulled out his phone. It was mayhem, missed calls, a tidal wave of texts, emails from contacts long dormant. The first message came from his sister, Moss, crying. Said, "You sounded just like Pop when he used to shut people down on the porch." Next, a college teammate messaged simply, "Bro, you just made history." Then the door creaked open. Riley, his communications director, entered holding a laptop, her face pale, eyes blazing. She said nothing, just turned the screen toward him. There it was. The clip trimmed, captioned, translated into languages Denzel couldn't even recognize, was everywhere. But people weren't just sharing it. They were pulling archived interviews, committee footage, speeches from years past, stitching them together into a timeline, a message, a truth, a movement. And at its center, again, the image of Denzel in that gym, leaning into the mic. In public schools in Los Angeles, Mr. President, no raised voice, no theatrics, just calm, deliberate precision. Outside the room, the hallway buzzed with footsteps and knocks. Every 10 seconds, another knock. CNN, MSNBC, NPR. Even conservative networks scrambling for a quote, a soundbite, anything live. But Denzel simply shook his head. "Not yet," he said quietly. Riley adjusted her glasses. "You sure you don't want to get ahead of the spin?" He stood smoothing his blazer with quiet intent. "Spin what?" "I told the truth. Let them twist it. Let them lie. I brought the receipts." From the street outside, muffled chants began drifting through the walls. Supporters were already gathering. Dozens strong signs raised high. Phones recording, voices rising. Among them, Tanya, a school nurse from Akron, held up a sign drawn in marker. "This is what a representative looks like." Beside her, a young man live-streamed, voice trembling. This is the first time I felt seen by someone in that room," he told his audience. He didn't just check the president. He did it like he's done it his whole life. And in truth, he had not always in front of cameras, not always facing presidents, but in conference rooms where his voice was overlooked, in boardrooms and studios where people tried to minimize him, in quiet battles, unfilmed, where he stood firm, calm, clear, undeniable, where he didn't fight with volume but with clarity and let silence speak the rest. Those same traits, once seen as too blunt, too direct, not polished enough, were now his power. And with that power came a new kind of storm, one he hadn't faced before. Not at this scale. By midnight, headlines circled the globe. Denzel Washington levels Trump with calm precision. Read The Guardian. Masterclass moment at Dayton Town Hall, declared Politico. In Toronto, Berlin, Lagos, international outlets ran the clip on repeat as if it were a championship buzzer beater. Back in his hotel room at the Crown Plaza off Edwin C. Moses Boulevard, Denzel sat on the edge of the bed. His shoes were off, shirt collar loosened, TV remote untouched on the nightstand. He didn't need to turn it on. He already knew. Near the window stood Dion, his chief of staff, phone in one hand, legal pad in the other. "He's not doing interviews until noon," Dion said firmly to someone on the line. "Yeah, we'll send out a statement in the morning." "No, he's not doing Hannity. Don't even ask." Denzel cracked open a ginger ale, glanced at his phone, vibrating nonstop. Another post, another tag, another caption. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a message. Denzel finally broke the silence, his voice low but firm. "How bad are they spinning it?" Dion didn't look up, still holding her phone to her ear. "Fox is calling it a setup. Breitbart's labeled you combative." She paused, then allowed herself the hint of a smile. "But the other side, teachers, unions, civil rights groups, even a few old-school Republicans, they're saying you showed restraint." Denzel let out a quiet chuckle. The kind heard in courtrooms when flimsy arguments collapse under their own weight. Restraint, he muttered. That's what they call it when a black man doesn't flip the whole table over. Dion's smile widened briefly, then back to business. I'll text you the draft talking points, she said, stepping out alone. Now Denzel leaned back and finally reached for the remote. He flicked on the television. The volume stayed low, but the images told the story clearly. CNN had the screen split, Denzel on one side, Trump on the other, replaying the confrontation like a courtroom drama. He didn't need the audio. The expression said enough. Even the analysts, usually polished, usually cautious, looked shaken. One Republican strategist admitted almost grudgingly. He handled himself with pure class. A Democratic commentator leaned in visibly emotional. We needed this, he said. Needed someone to show how it's done. But not every reaction was applause. Out in the digital wilds, Twitter had already turned. The trolls mobilized fast, flooding timelines with old photos from Denzel's youth, out-of-context video clips, twisted voting records. Conspiracy memes spread like oil slicks. Desperate attempts to stain a moment they couldn't control. Denzel inhaled slowly, then powered down his phone. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the muted television. He'd seen this before. He knew the playbook by heart. They would twist the narrative before the truth had time to take root. That was how it worked. Always had been. A black man steps into power and suddenly the rules shift. Now he's too sharp. Now he's too calm. Now he's too dangerous. But Denzel, he didn't feel dangerous. And he wasn't angry. He didn't feel angry. He felt clear. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the aftermath was already rippling. By sunrise, the leaks had started. Reports flooded in from every direction, inside sources whispering about a backstage meltdown. Trump, red-faced and furious, lashed out at aides, blaming anyone within reach for letting that actor take a swing at him on national television. Find something, he reportedly barked. There's always something. The morning news seized on it. On a live segment, a former Republican senator chuckled grimly. If he rattled Trump that fast, he said, just imagine what a full debate would look like. And then the hashtag dropped. Termaris Washington's 28. Not because Denzel had announced anything. He hadn't. But people saw something different, something rare. An individual who didn't fold, didn't yell, didn't stoop to spectacle. In the hotel room, Riley burst through the door, phone in hand. You got to see this, she said, breathless. She handed over the screen. It was a direct message from a high school senior in Newark, New Jersey. I watched what you did and I cried. I've never seen someone who looks like me shut down disrespect like that with calm. I want to go into politics now. Just wanted to say thank you. Denzel read it twice. Save that, he said, handing the phone back. We'll need it later. Because while the world was still catching up, what they couldn't see was everything that had built him for this moment. This was a media polish. It wasn't a rehearsed line. It was life. The next morning, as networks debated whether Denzel had just shifted the 2028 political landscape, he stood quietly in the hotel bathroom, brushing his teeth. He wasn't practicing sound bites. He was remembering the smell of dust and chalk in his third-grade classroom back in South Central LA, the broken fan rattling overhead, Mrs. Holland in her faded blue sweater, always calling on him when no one else would. That was his first stage. That was home. His father, a Pentecostal minister on Sundays, a city worker the rest of the week, would come home covered in sweat and fiberglass dust. A man who never finished high school, but passed on 2 lessons that never left Denzel. Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth, and don't talk just to fill the silence. Talk when it matters. In high school, Denzel hadn't joined the debate team for the argument. He joined because he wanted to understand power. His first topic, prison reform. He stayed up until 2 a.m., combing through statistics, reading court cases, figuring out how to move hearts with facts and fire. When he finally stood in that old auditorium, facing a half-asleep crowd in a scuffed-up gym, one of the judges looked up, leaned in, and whispered to a colleague, "That kid's got something." After that first high school debate, his coach pulled him aside with a word of advice that stuck for life. "You're dangerous when you slow down." The coach said, "Don't rush, let it land." And Denzel never forgot it. After graduation, He enrolled at Cal State LA, where the reality of underfunded education wasn't theoretical. It was in every classroom, ceilings that leaked when it rained, desks with missing drawers, Wi-Fi that came and went like a passing breeze. But in every seat sat raw brilliance, students with stories no textbook could capture. That's where Denzel sharpened his voice, not just to argue, but to advocate. As a sophomore, he stood at a student town hall and spoke out on the lack of mental health resources across campus. There were no cameras, no reporters, just a quiet room thick with listening. As he walked out, a janitor named Mr. Bell stopped him. "Keep talking like that, son," he said, "and they'll either put you on a stage or try to shut you up." Both would come true. After law school, Denzel returned home, not for spotlight, but for service. He took on defense cases others avoided, clients who'd slipped through every crack in the system, represented by overworked public defenders, held up by a system that showed up late, if at all. These weren't people who trusted courts or titles. They trusted presence. And Denzel fought for them, not with theatrics, but with precision. He remembered one 19-year-old client facing robbery charges who asked during their second meeting, "Why do you even care? I'm just another number to them." And Denzel told him plainly, "That's exactly why I care." Those moments came flooding back every time someone called him too aggressive, too polished, too Hollywood. None of those critics had ever stood in a courtroom and watched a mother collapse when her son got 15 years for stealing baby formula. Denzel didn't become who he was for viral clips or headlines. He became who he was because silence had never saved anyone in the world he came from. Back in Dayton, he tossed his toothbrush into the sink, dried his face, and walked over to the window. Down on the sidewalk, a small group of students had gathered holding handmade signs. One read simply, "We hear you." He placed his hand against the glass just for a moment. Downstairs, his team was deep in planning. Interviews, booking requests, sit-downs with CNN, podcast invites, press inquiries flooding his inbox. He could ride the wave. He could play the game. But he knew this wasn't just a moment. This was a message. And it didn't begin on that stage in Dayton. It began in classrooms where the roofs leaked while teachers told children to dream big. And now, for the first time, he had a platform loud enough that even the ones who never listened before were leaning in. Less than 24 hours after the town hall, the backlash was at full speed. At 6:42 a.m., Trump tweeted, "I was simply making a lighthearted remark. Denzel Washington is clearly too sensitive." Another angry liberal who can't take a joke. Sad. Cable news lit up instantly. Talk radio doubled down. Conservative anchors framed it as manufactured outrage political theater. One guest called it a textbook example of Democrats weaponizing race. Another claimed the moment was too perfect to be real. That was rehearsed, they insisted. The president's communications team issued a damage control statement. The president respects all members of Congress. His comment was taken out of context by a sensationalist media eager to stir division. In the backseat of a black SUV, Denzel scrolled through the statement. He didn't react, just handed the phone to Dion, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. "They're trying to bait you," Dion said softly. "I know," Denzel replied, eyes still shut. "Let them." He hadn't planned to go viral, but he wasn't about to stay silent either. Now that the moment had landed, Denzel faced a choice. Let others define it or take control of the narrative himself. That afternoon, he made his move. He appeared on The Rundown, a sharp, fast-paced political show with a strong following among younger viewers. Host Laya Moreno wasted no time. She leaned forward, her signature, sly grin in place. "Let's skip the small talk," she said. "Did you expect it to blow up like this?" Denzel stayed composed. "I expected the president to try something," he replied evenly. "What I didn't expect was how loud the silence got after I answered." Illa raised an eyebrow. "And what do you say to those claiming your response was rehearsed?" Denzel turned slightly, looking straight into the camera. "I say they've never walked around with 1,000 conversations from childhood packed into their back pocket, just waiting for someone to test them. That wasn't rehearsed. That was lived." And with that, the second wave began. The clip exploded again, not because Denzel shouted, not because he struck back with fire, but because he didn't. His restraint, his rhythm, his refusal to meet disrespect with noise. It was turning into something else, a new kind of politics, one built not on spectacle or chaos, but on clarity, control, and truth. Still, the pushback didn't stop. A fringe blog surfaced grainy footage of Denzel protesting in college, spinning it into imagined ties to radical groups. Conspiracy accounts made wild claims, ghostwriters, scripted moments, fabricated credentials. None of it stuck, but it came in waves. One morning, Dion showed Denzel a tweet from a sitting senator. America doesn't need another viral celebrity in office. It read, "We need serious leaders doing serious work." Denzel just chuckled and shook his head. "I've passed more bills this year than that man's bothered to show up and vote on," he muttered over his coffee. But the noise wasn't all static. The next day, a voicemail buzzed through to his phone. Senator Lel Burks, Republican Ohio, known for rarely crossing party lines. No callback number, just a message. "We don't agree on much, Mr. Washington," the voice said. "But the way you carried yourself the other night, that's leadership. This city could use more of it." Denzel played it twice. That same night, away from cameras and headlines, he met quietly with 10 local teachers around a folding table in a Dayton community center. They spoke about taped-up textbooks, broken heaters, and lunch lines that ran dry before every kid got a meal. One of them, Mrs. Francine, a retired science teacher with a raspy voice and thick glasses, reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't answer that man for yourself," she said softly. "You answered for all of us who never got the mic." Denzel paused, his hand tightening just slightly. "Nah," he said. "I answered for the kids who still don't have one." And he was beginning to realize this wasn't about clapping back. This was about shifting the entire conversation. By day 3, the headlines weren't just recapping what had happened. They were decoding what it meant. "Washington shifts political landscape," one outlet declared. On talk shows, in classrooms, and around kitchen tables across America, conversations were sparking, ones many hadn't had in years. Social media lit up with a patchwork of personal testimonies. Teachers posted pictures of dilapidated classrooms and outdated books. Students created TikToks with the caption, "Thank you, Denzel, for seeing us." In Toledo, Ohio, a 7th grade English class used Denzel's words as a writing prompt. The teacher wrote it across the board in big, bold letters. "In public schools in Los Angeles, Mr. President," and below that she asked, "Where did you learn your voice?" The answers flooded in. "From my grandma watching the news, from my coach who told me I mattered, from seeing someone who looked like me finally speak up on TV." Across the country, teachers began printing out Denzel's words and reading them aloud in their classrooms. Not because the speech was long, but because it hit home, because it spoke directly to people who had grown used to being spoken over. People who had never once linked Denzel Washington with politics were now quoting him like he'd always been a part of their story. Cable news dubbed him a new voice of clarity. Civil rights leaders drew comparisons to giants. Barbara Jordan, Shirley Chisholm, names spoken with reverence. One editorial in the Detroit Free Press said it plainly. Denzel Washington didn't just answer a loaded question. He reminded a generation that your roots don't make you small, they make you unbreakable. Inside the White House, the damage was still unfolding. At a rally in Springfield, Missouri, a reporter pressed Trump on whether he regretted his remark. He waved it off. "I said what I said. People are too sensitive these days. It's all political theater." But by then, it didn't matter how many times he spun it. The moment had slipped through his hands. It had grown. It had moved. It had come alive. School boards from Wichita to Erie to Milwaukee began passing resolutions demanding more funding for public schools, citing Denzel's town hall exchange as the catalyst. Grant proposals began quoting his words. In Indiana, one district launched an initiative titled Teach with Dignity, drawn directly from his response. At Denzel's headquarters, his staff worked around the clock to keep up. Letters poured in, some angry, but most overwhelmed with thanks. One came handwritten from a retired principal in Shreveport. 32 years in education. "I've never heard someone speak our truth in so few words. Thank you for making us visible." Back in South Central, where Denzel's story began, students organized a rally. Respect public schools. Hundreds turned out. Homemade signs, screen-printed shirts, voices rising. Denzel didn't show up in person. Instead, he called in. No fanfare, no stump speech, just a steady voice through a phone screen. "This ain't my moment," he told them. "It's yours." His voice calm, his smile easy. Keep speaking up even when they don't like it. Inside his team, they'd already started calling it the shift. Because this wasn't just politics anymore. It had become something deeper, emotional, cultural, a long collective exhale. People who had spent years biting their tongues, absorbing patronizing smiles and subtle insults, suddenly felt, even if just for a moment, that they weren't alone. In a small diner in Lexington, Nebraska, an older black couple sat in a booth and overheard a group of high schoolers talking about Denzel. The woman leaned over. "Y'all talking about that congressman?" One of the teens nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He didn't blink, not once. The woman smiled slow and proud. "That's the kind of quiet fire we need." Back in Denzel's district office, the lobby had transformed into a message wall, letters pinned to the walls, sticky notes, torn notebook pages, napkins inked with the raw words of lived experience. "I learned English in Mississippi barefoot reading church bulletins. I studied under flickering lights and still graduated top of my class. Tell the president I speak 3 languages and one of them is dignity." But amid all the attention, all the momentum, Denzel understood something deeper. A message is just noise without a movement behind it. By the end of the week, it wasn't about Trump anymore. It wasn't even about the town hall. What had started as a quiet counterpunch in a school gym had evolved into a national turning point. Something real, something you could feel shifting in barbershops, classrooms, church halls, and living rooms across the country. In Flint, Michigan, Real Talk Radio opened its latest segment with a single question. When was the first time someone talked down to you because of how you spoke? The phone lines lit up like fire. Earl, a retired mechanic, called in first. He shared how years ago a supervisor told him not to write reports, said his grammar was too rough, too unprofessional. Next came a young nurse from Albuquerque, Latina, barely out of college. She recalled how her high school counselor told her to skip college altogether and consider beauty school instead. Then came a voice from Mobile, Alabama. A grandmother, her tone was steady, proud. That man asked her where she learned English. She said, "Baby, I taught English to my whole family with a GED and 3 jobs. I bet she learned it from women like me." And with that, the story wasn't about Denzel anymore. It was about memory, about dignity, about people who had carried invisible scars from words meant to shame, and who were now finding strength in words that made them stand tall. Even lawmakers who long kept their distance began shifting. Representative Theo Nash, a quiet voice from Cincinnati who rarely stepped out of line, tweeted, "We may not always see eye to eye on policy, but I respect anyone who speaks with that kind of calm. Public schools built this country. Let's fund them like it." In classrooms across the nation, something powerful began to take shape. Essays, poetry, spoken word pieces born from that moment. In Springfield, Oregon, an 8th grader stood at a local council meeting and ended her speech with, "My grammar isn't broken. Your understanding is." Denzel's office launched a campaign with educators, where we learned. No slick branding, no big sponsors, just unfiltered stories from real people. One post read, "I learned English under a tin roof in Laredo sitting on a milk crate while my Abella translated soap operas." Another, "I learned how to argue in a kitchen with 6 cousins and 1 slice of pizza." My first podium was the dining table. Celebrities joined in. Athletes, actors, authors, childhood photos surfaced everywhere, framed by one line. "This is where I learned." But Denzel didn't repost them. He didn't comment. His focus stayed where it always had, on the ground with the people. He visited schools across his district. No media crews, no press releases, just listening. At one stop, Ms. Riggins, a veteran teacher of 22 years, pulled him aside. "No one's ever asked me what I need without a camera rolling," she said. Denzel simply smiled. "Tell me everything," he replied, and he listened. Meanwhile, the speculation grew louder. The pundits couldn't resist. Washington 2028, future speaker, rising star. But Denzel stayed on message. "I didn't come here to run for anything," he said in a quiet PBS interview. I came here to serve, and right now serving means making sure every kid in this country walks into a classroom that's worth their future. Still, the questions didn't stop. Behind closed doors, Dion, ever direct, told a reporter, "You can chase headlines. We're chasing change." Meetings began quietly. Policy drafts emerged. Something bigger was taking shape more than a moment. A legislative push for federal education equity. Not just money, infrastructure, accountability, fairness. Because Denzel understood a moment can pass, but a movement builds. Support came slowly. A bipartisan group, some bold, some uncertain, stepped forward to stand with him publicly. And with them came the warnings. You'll make enemies. You're spending political capital too soon. But Denzel didn't hesitate. This capital, he told Dion, calm as ever. This was never mine. It belongs to every kid who's ever been told to stay quiet, to stay in their lane. I'm just borrowing it. And if you borrow something that valuable, you'd better use it because he knew the truth. Moments fade, but movements grow roots. 3 weeks later, Denzel sat quietly in the back row of a middle school auditorium in Peoria, Illinois. No cameras, no press, just a room full of eighth graders standing on a worn-out stage under buzzing lights, reading monologues they'd written about voice, about identity, about what it means to be heard. One girl stepped forward, hands trembling, and leaned into a crackling microphone. "I talk fast," she began. "They say I sound ghetto." Then a pause. "I say I sound like my mama rushing to feed me before her shift starts." The room erupted with applause. Denzel smiled. He hadn't come for a headline. He hadn't even told his team he'd be stopping in Peoria on his way to Chicago. He just wanted to see how far the ripple had traveled, and it had made it here to a school with peeling paint, a cracked basketball court, and a whole lot of heart. Afterward, the principal found him in the hallway. "You don't know what you started?" the man said quietly. "These kids, they believe their voices count now. That wasn't true before." Denzel nodded, shook his hand, said nothing more. He didn't need to, but inside he felt it. Not pride, not ego. Wait, responsibility. Because speaking up is one thing. But living in the echo of your own words, knowing people are still listening, that's something else entirely. Back in Washington, momentum was building. His Fair Classrooms Act picked up surprising traction. A few centrist Republicans crossed the aisle, co-signing sections of the bill. He didn't get everything he asked for, but that was never the goal. The goal was progress. The goal was motion. At one committee hearing, an older senator leaned into his mic and admitted, "I didn't like how he got here, but I can't deny he's here for the right reasons." That clip made the rounds too, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest, rare. Meanwhile, the president had moved on. New controversy, new headlines. His circle stopped mentioning Denzel entirely. In their world, the moment had passed. But outside, in neighborhoods where schools felt more like afterthoughts than investments, where teachers rotated like temps, where students prepped for exams on busted Chromebooks, the conversation lived on. One afternoon, a package arrived at Denzel's office, sent from a small public school in Roanoke, Virginia. Inside a handmade scrapbook, pages of handwritten letters, children's drawings taped to the last page, a certificate made of construction paper for speaking truth in a room that wasn't built to hear it. Denzel didn't cry. He didn't need to. He just sat quietly, his fingers grazing the pages, letting the silence speak for him. Later that day, Dion entered a meeting room. "They want to give you an award," she said. "That big DC gala, the one with all the cameras." "Which night?" Denzel asked without looking up. "Same night as the PDA meeting in District 9. Denzel didn't hesitate. "Tell them I'll be at the PDA. Seriously, dead serious. Because awards don't fix broken desks. They don't patch leaking ceilings. But showing up in a school cafeteria, asking parents what kind of chairs their kids sit in, that changes things. Sure, the headlines would fade. They always do. But in lesson plans, in library displays, in mural quotes painted on gymnasium walls, and in the confidence of a child who now stands taller when speaking, it lived on. And Denzel, he kept doing the work. Long hearings, hard negotiations, town halls where applause didn't come easy and heat filled the room because he knew it would happen again. They'd test him, misquote him, come after him, and he was ready. Because that night in Dayton, it wasn't about winning. It wasn't about owning anyone. It was about reclaiming something. Dignity, presence, proof that power doesn't have to shout. It can speak with grace, stand with calm, and still shake a room to its core. Years later, long after that presidency faded, the clip still resurfaced, still moved people. Not because of what was said to him, but because of how he answered. Simple, clear, unshaken. In public schools in Los Angeles, Mr. President, the same ones your policies keep underfunding, not just a comeback, a declaration, a legacy. So if this story hits something in you, if you see yourself or someone you love in those words, don't just watch, speak, ask, push, vote, show up. Because moments don't change the world. People do.